Do you feel in some ways that what you're doing is a continuation of what your father never got to do?
Well, I feel like I'm representing the same kind of values. My worldview is almost completely consistent with my father and uncle's worldview.
Kennedy has positioned himself as an anti-establishment candidate. He says Americans are tired of politicians like Joe Biden and claims the president's foreign policies are being driven by the same ideology that led to the Iraq invasion in 2003.
It was, at that time, the worst foreign policy error in American history. It was a preemptive war against somebody who had done nothing to the United States. There was kind of these vague allegations that maybe he had something to do with 9/11, which he clearly did not. That he may be involved with Al Qaeda, which he was not. That he may have had weapons of mass destruction. And based upon all of these rumors, we invaded the country and we killed 1 million Iraqis. And we left a mess where the country has no cohesion. It's a battle between Shia and Sunni death squads, and we pushed it into turning it essentially into a proxy for Iran, which is exactly the foreign policy objective we had not to do for 40 years previously. Oh, it was a catastrophe and it led ultimately to the wars in Syria and Yemen and Pakistan, Afghanistan. It was a crazy project from the beginning, and they ended up doing just the opposite. And now the same people are back in Washington in the Biden White House, the exact same neocons who, had been ostracized and exiled after the war in Iraq, and they've orchestrated this war in the Ukraine. And, by the way, I support the humanitarian aid to the Ukraine. But Mr. Zelensky and the Ukrainian people are almost as much victims of the neocons in the White House that are today crushing the Ukraine in a proxy war between two great powers to serve these kind of global machinations that they've been up to since 2014. And so we've sacrificed 300,000 Ukrainian soldiers, young people, more than 300,000, who are, the flower of Ukrainian youth, to achieve a goal that can't be achieved.
So do you think Russia will win the war in Ukraine?
I think Russians are winning the war. Yes, I believe the Russians will win the war. I think the Russians can't afford to lose that war. I don't think that the Ukrainian government or the American government are being honest about the costs, about the casualties, and about our role in it. We were told this was a humanitarian mission. And then President Biden said, well, the real mission is to depose Vladimir Putin. And his Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, in April 2022, said that the purpose of the war is to exhaust the Russian forces, to make them incapable of making war anywhere else in the world.
So
That is the opposite of a humanitarian mission. A humanitarian mission means reducing the bloodshed, ending the conflict. What the neocons who are running the White House want is to exhaust the Russian army and depose Vladimir Putin, and that is not going to happen.
How do you feel about potentially running alongside Donald Trump?
I want to run against Trump, and I can run against Trump better than anybody else can.
Do you think you could win?
I know I can win because I get many of the same supporters. I will take support from President Trump. No other Democrat can do that. My supporters are probably equally Republican and Democrat at this point. And I get more independent voters than anybody. And I can confront President Trump with the lockdowns, which no Democrat can. Lockdowns, he closed 3.3 million businesses. He closed 41% of the black-owned businesses in our country would never reopen again. This is a war on the poor. It was a war on minorities. It was the destruction of the middle class.
On Memorial Day, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. made his first campaign speech in San Diego. He paid tribute to all service members, talked about how the Democratic Party has changed since the era of his uncle, President John F. Kennedy, and his father, also a presidential candidate in 1968, Robert F. Kennedy Sr. He talked about censorship, the COVID lockdowns, the middle class, the economy, and more.
The most important way for us to honor the men and women who gave their lives for our country is to protect the rights that they died to give us. I feel like I'm losing my country. I feel like my party has gone off the rails. It's become the party of war when the Democratic Party was always skeptical about war. It's become the party of censorship, which is it's antithetical to the entire definition and tradition of liberalism. The COVID lockdowns, which they supported, was a war on the poor, a war on minorities, and this country really suffered deeply during that period. They have not given up the power to impose those in the future. And we have now created in this country this very, very troubling precedent. We need to buttress our middle class and stop sending money abroad for wars. We're like an alcoholic who's behind on the mortgage and is taking the milk money and buying rounds for everybody, strangers at the bar. We don't have the money. I'm going to be the best environmental president in history. Preserving habitat, regenerative agriculture, stopping water pollution. We need to preserve something for our children.